Let's talk about Venezuela here. Now, Venezuela overall met towards all three of the steps in order to get to hyperinflation. The first two key ones, which were instability, right, as we talked about here in our drawing, as we go up here, it's usually caused by war, pandemic, political unrest. In the case of Venezuela, this was political unrest, right? So in Venezuela, they had their issue. The response of Nicholas Maduro and the general Venezuelan government was to print more money in order to cover themselves through a crisis that they were going through. There's a lot of reasons people argue that caused it. I think it had a lot to do with political dissent and distrust. It had to do with the oil price crashing, which was a large part of Venezuela's economy. And again, like many governments in the past, Venezuela took the route of printing large sums of their native currency, the Venezuelan bolivar. Now, I want to go ahead and showcase some really shocking photos because these are not black and white photos. This is present day stuff that happened just back a couple years ago. Here's a picture of a normal chicken, right? Many of us take it for granted. We can go get a chicken or turkey at the local food market. Heck, you might eat it every single night, right? And what we see here is the amount of money at the time this photo was taken of Venezuelan bolivars that would be required to exchange to a merchant, a grocery store, in order to purchase this one chicken. Amazing. This amount of money originally, back just a couple months or a year or two out, could have been someone's life savings. But now in order to get something that really is seen today as common good, is now seen as this luxury that barely anyone can afford, because the currency has been depreciated so much, right? Let's take a look here as well at a photo you might see in the article, right? To just get a basket or a couple handful of tomatoes, stacks upon stacks of cash, right? So these are the visual signs here when you start needing more money, whether it be electronic payments through your debit card or through cash settlement, in this case, hand to hand. Either way, the cost of goods and services are, starting to double or triple from the original value. Those are those early warning signs that something big is around the corner. And the problem with hyperinflation here, right? If it weren't bad enough that the government starts printing money, hyperinflation, the actual increase in the price of goods and services gets exacerbated because you have the initial stages here, the initial signs where you start to see prices start to double or triple due to these inflationary pressures. And we've seen this year, the highest inflation we've seen in decades. I think the highest rate since 1990, very similar levels as we're growing here towards what we saw back in the 70s and 80s in the United States, where you get this general distrust in the currency. And that exacerbates the increase in the price of goods and services, even when governments aren't printing money to those levels, right? So people start saying, you know what, I'm really not sure what the inflation rate is going to be, so I'm going to start marking up my prices. And people claim that this is merchants or companies trying to price gouge. No, this is just a general response here because they have to protect themselves. They have to maintain profitability as a company or they'll go bankrupt. So they have to anticipate these next moves from the government. It all stems from the mismanagement of monetary policy. We can't blame merchants for this, right? So again, big misconception here. It always stems from monetary policy. And we can see the price of a cup of coffee in Venezuela going from just a couple of bolivars, right? Probably single double digits, all the way up here to 3,000 bolivars in mid-2019. Absolutely crazy stuff. So this is, again, a chart here of the inflation rate on an annualized basis in Venezuela. You can already see, again, that topic we talked about here, the warning signs early ahead. Generally, Venezuela had already been relatively unstable to some degree, had a relatively decent rate of inflation each year, double-digit annualized inflation, right? It doesn't happen overnight. But then you see here, the sign here, the warning signs, 121% here in, I think it was in 2017 or 2018, right? Early warning signs coming about a year or two out before the major hyperinflation kicks in. And now the important thing is you see this drop here. This doesn't mean that the inflation per se dropped, but the inflation rate, right? So we had a 65,000% increase in the inflation rate in Venezuela. We had 19,906% increase afterwards, a 2,355% increase afterwards. And it's remained relatively high and around that range to where it's at the point where merchants, I've had, for example, my partner, my girlfriend, she's actually visited Venezuela and she would go to the merchant to see, what was the cost to get a bit of ice cream in the local town square. And a week later, she came back and the prices had already changed. They'd already adapted to this hyperinflationary environment. So it's absolutely crazy stuff. Now, it's not just throughout regions in Latin America like Venezuela that are experiencing these issues. Again, the issue knows no borders.